Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Intuitive Angling, and really appreciate you guys coming by the channel to watch today's video. Really appreciate that. Guys, today we're going to be talking about what I consider the number one mistake, probably the most common mistake that probably 90% of the bass anglers out there make. And this is definitely costing you fish for sure. So we're going to go over that in today's video, give you guys some tips and advice on how to avoid that most common mistake. Also, guys, before we get started, I just want to remind you that we only got 1 week left in the Black Friday sale for not only the Tackle Warehouse sale that's going on, but for the Solar Bat sunglasses on my signature series. So if you guys are interested in getting some stuff from Tackle Warehouse, they got 20% off on almost everything on the site between now and the end of November. So I'll put my Tackle Warehouse link and my Solar Bat sunglasses link in the description of the video if you guys want to support the channel and get some good deals right now. I really appreciate that. Okay, there is a lot of mistakes that people make. I mean, including myself. I'm not excluding myself on that, because the mistake that I'm telling you about, I still make it occasionally in my own fishing. Biggest mistake that people make, 90% of the people make out there, is they set the hook too hard. This is super, super common, and it's one of the reasons that people lose a lot of fish, is simply because they're too forceful with the hook set. Now, what happens on this a lot of times is most people, when they get a strike, they're sort of like a live nerve ending. Most people are not anticipating a strike. So when you do finally get that strike, there's like, it's like an instinctive reaction to set the hook hard. I mean, it's just like, that's just what you do. It's sort of instinctual. In fact, it's so common, guys, that I have had lots of dreams, probably 50 dreams or more throughout the course of my life, where I woke myself up because I was setting the hook hard in my dream. So this is super, super common. And one of the things that, there's a couple of reasons why people do this. Number one is they haven't been taught any better or different on it. And number two, like I said, they're not expecting the strike. So I want to talk to you a little bit about how to avoid that. Then I want to talk a little bit about, why it's bad to set the hook hard. So let's get into that first. So first of all, there's a couple different reasons why you do not want to set the hook hard. Number one is if you set the hook hard, especially on certain lure categories, like where you're short line in a jig or a Texas rig worm, or setting the hook hard on a lure that's close to the bait, close to the boat, or if you're setting the hook hard with braided line or whatever, a lot of times you're going to tear the fish's mouth, because the fish has a lot of bony areas around their mouth, but these areas, like right here on either side of their front of their mouth, they're membranes. They're like really thin, and it's a very common place to hook a fish at. It's very common for a hook to get in these particular areas. And if you set the hook hard and the fish is positioned where that hook comes out of that membrane, it's very easy to tear that membrane. In fact, it's very easy to put like a tear that's a ½ inch wide in some of them. And what happens is when that fish jumps, they're going to throw your lure, because you just, put a big hole in their mouth there. That's the number one thing. Number two thing with that, or actually three things. Number two thing with that is, if you set the hook hard and fast and soon as you feel the strike, there's one of the things about that is that you pull the lure away from the fish. Now, certain lures are different with this. Now, one of the main lure categories for this, I'll give a perfect example, is like a chatterbait or a topwater lure. A lot of times, if you set the hook too hard or too soon on like a chatterbait or a topwater, you're going to pull that lure away from the fish, and you're going to just barely get them hooked, or they're not going to get hooked, or you're going to pull the hook out of the fish's mouth. Very, very common, because if you're using a low stretch line and you're like this live nerve ending, when that fish hits, they just don't all the time inhale that bait back into their mouth. A lot of times they come up and nip it, or they get just a little bit of the back of the hook or the back of the worm in their mouth. So setting that hook prematurely is a bad no-no in fishing as far as losing fish. And finally, a lot of times if you set the hook too hard, and you're using like some type of a lure that, like a jig or a slip sinker, that has some weight on the front of it, a lot of times that fish will come up and they'll inhale that jig or that Texas rig worm completely in their mouth, and they're holding it just like that. They're not eating it, they're just holding it, and they may swim off with it. And if you jack them hard, a lot of times, especially again, if you don't have a lot of slack in the line, it will force that fish's mouth open. The actual head of the jig, and this happens a lot more on heavier weights like heavier head jigs and heavier headed slip sinkers, that slip sinker or that piece of lead will force that fish's mouth open, and a lot of times that bait just shoots out, from the mouth there. Okay, so there's two elements to this. Number one is setting the hook too hard, and number two is setting the hook too prematurely, which sort of go hand in hand a little bit with that. So what you want to do, a couple different ways you can get past this. Number one is you have to constantly be ready for a strike, because you will never intellectualize and you will never go through that thought process about setting the hook softer and hesitating a little bit before you do set that hook, unless you're expecting a strike. So it takes a little bit of mental discipline. So every single cast that you make, try to really be involved in that cast and expect the strike, and expect and think about what you're going to do. It's like, say you're reeling that spinnerbait next to a lay down log or something, and you throw it out there and it's like, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to get this bite as soon as the spinnerbait clears this log. And when you're ready for that, you know that number one, okay, I'm not going to jack the hook hard. I'm just going to set it, nice and gentle and pull into it. And number two is I'm going to hesitate just a second before I set the hook. So that is how you overcome that. Now, it's against human nature to want to hesitate. Now, hesitation is a very, very big factor in setting the hook correctly. That's why a lot of times you can sort of compensate for that by using a softer tip rod. So I'll go back to like a spinnerbait or a chatterbait or a buzzbait again. A lot of times if you go to a softer rod on there, the flex on that rod will give you that hesitation even if you forget to do so. So try not to use too stiff of rods. I think overall a lot of people use too stiff of rods, and that's why they tear a fish's mouth, or that's why they set the hook too prematurely. I think that's a big factor with that. So don't really use broomsticks with that. And also, when you set the hook on a fish, you should think in terms of pulling and reeling. It's like you don't want to just like boom like that. You want to just pull like that while you reel at the same time, because when you're pulling and reeling and you don't put any slack in the line, you're constantly making that fish come right to you, and that fish isn't jolted from that hard hook set. And a lot of times when you set that hook hard and you jolt that fish, it makes them go crazy. But if you just pull and reel into them, a lot of times they come right to you and they don't even fight much until they get by the boat. And also, as you're reeling into them, and if you keep the tension on and keep a lot of pressure on them, that hook is constantly penetrating further and further as you're pulling and reeling, but you're not trying to jerk it into them or jerk it out of them. So that's the biggest mistake, guys. 90% of the people out there, even the pros I know, even myself still sometimes today, we set the hook too soon, we set the hook too prematurely. And if you really become conscious of that and focus on not doing that, your catch ratio, as far as your bite to land ratio, is going to go up significantly. So anyway, I hope it helps out, guys. We'll talk later.